sometimes when we start woodworking, we go to the lumber yard to buy our wood, and that's fine, and I encourage that. I go to the lumber yard all the time, and I buy pre-planed stock. It's already squared. It's gone through a mass manufacturing process that actually works 90% of the time. But there's a lot of my furniture pieces that I can't rely on that for. I want a different wood. I want some different sizes, so I have to prepare the stock. And this is a very rugged piece of wood, and I want to get one leg out of this, and I can. I'm going to be cutting this somewhere like this. So I'll get rid of most of that wane. It's a table leg. It's part of a series of legs or something like that. So this will help me to help you to understand what it takes to square a piece of wood 4 square. And that's what we call it, 4 square stock. This particular piece, I need 19 inches for a table leg. That's my rough length there. And I don't have to straighten this area all the way through. But the first thing I do when I get a piece of wood is I look down here with my eye, and I don't know if you can see here, there's a curve in this. It's what we call a bow. So we have to take out the bow. It doesn't look twisted, but we've got methods for checking for twist, so we'll show you how to do that. The first stage is to get a straight edge on here, and that's what I'm going to do first. So firstly, this has got quite a big hump on here, but I'm only going to this point, so I eyeball down here. I'll have to take about 1/8 of an inch off this hump to get this down. Let me show you what I do. Now, even with this rough sawn stock, this is band sawn, so these lines going across here tell me it's band saw. It could have been circular sawn. Bandsaw takes a lot less material out, but I'm looking at this, and I'm looking for the surface fibers where the bandsaw, even when the wood was wet, was ripping in a different direction. And I can tell the orientation of the grain if I do that. Now, you can also perhaps see here, right down here, you can see this is way out of square. So I've got to plane this square. But first of all I have to do on this one face here is plane it as straight as possible and get any twist out. And we'll be checking for twist using winding sticks in a minute. So first I'm going to put this in the vise this way. Make it nice and secure. Now this is a very short-soled plane. This is the number 4. You see me use this all the time. Not the ideal tool for straightening stock with, but it's working fine. So this, you can see my high spot here and here. So this plane is taking the high spot when I get to here because I'm pressing on the heel of the plane now. I've got my gap right at this front edge. Can you see that? So it rocks on there. So I want to introduce another plane. Now I could do it with this plane, and if it's the only plane you've got, go ahead and use it. And periodically what you'll do is you'll take this piece of wood out of the vise, just like this, and you'll eye down the length, and already I can see I've got a nice straight area on this edge, even with a number 4 smoothing plane. So I'm going down around to about here. I'll mark this. I've oversized it a little bit. So I'm going to get a bigger plane out now because I want to show you what we would typically use. And this would be the next plane that you would buy. I've got a number 5.5 jack. It's called a jack plane. And this is a great plane. And this is probably the only plane you would ever really need for truing up your stock. So this is a longer plane, it's wider, it's got more weight to it, so when you pull back and throw it forward like this, it's got enough weight. So this is a typical process that you have to do with every piece of wood you buy when it's rough sawn. So as I work down here, I try and work across the whole width. We have another video on preparing your plane to make sure that it's straight, that the sole is straight. The longer the plane, the more likely it is to move in the body of the plane because heat causes the plane sole to change. You don't have to worry about that right now. So I'm going down here, eyeball down the length like this. I'm well within my 20 inches. So I have to take this all the way to the end here. I'm already nearly there. I'm just going to check myself to see how much this has shifted since I started planing. That's just by eyeballing. So we're already pretty close to being square, but I have to get this face dead flat. I'm actually planing against the grain as well. I can see a little bit of tear out here. I just adjusted my plane, probably without you noticing, just to take off a little bit more. And this won't be the final planing. This is the straightening, truing the edge till I get to that end of the billet like this. And I eyeball down there and I'm dead straight. That's because the sole of my plane is dead flat. So now I've got to do this adjacent face. But one thing I want to do is make sure I didn't plane any twist into this. So how I do that is with two pieces of wood we call winding sticks. These are beautiful winding sticks. You can see they're made out of rosewood. It's got whites in here. It's got a dot here. It has a dot here. And these are perfectly parallel. So when I put the winding stick on this end, I put the dot right in the middle of the piece of wood. Let's see if I can position this a little bit better for you. Like this and this. So I make these parallel with one another. I don't flip it this way. Keep it parallel, and then I step back and I look from one side to the other. And I've got some twisting. The nice thing about this is this divides into this stick 4 or 5 times, so that's exaggerating the twist. So it's actually showing 5 times more twist than it is. So I'm slightly higher on this corner here to here. Easily corrected by going with the plane again. And what I do is I go from high point to high point here with my plane to make this correction. So I go here and across here like this. Now I believe that's very close to all I needed to take off. So now I go straight across the length like this, and then I'm going to test it with the winding sticks again like this. Everything out of my line of sight. Step back over here. So I still need quite a bit more. So I'm going to go with a shorter plane this time here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to work on this end like that. Put my winding sticks back in place. Like this. Okay. Got a little bit too far now. So I'm going with my longer sticks till I get rid of that twist. And now absolutely no twist in there. Now it's perfectly out of wind, or out of twist should I say. Now I look along it this way. and I'm dead straight. So now, this is my registration face. What I do now is I make a mark on here that we call the face mark. Somewhere in the middle of my billet, I go like this. That gives me the cursive letter F. It's actually upside down, it would be like this. So I've taken the bottom part off this F. This is going to point, this is like an arrow that points to this face. So now I take the other face and make that square to this one face. This is a perfectly true, dead flat face. My square always registers against this face, as will my marking gauges and everything else when I'm laying out. So there you can see how far we're still out of square along this billet. Here it's less. So that means that's telling me that this is twisted. I've got a slight hollow in here. I doubt whether you could see it, but it's got a hollow in here. And so I'm going to have a high spot here and a high spot here. I'm also out of square. This is higher than this. So into the vise. I'm going to use the short plane just to get me started. See, this is taking nothing off here because this is higher and this is higher. So I'm going to focus here just with a few strokes. Take down some of that high. Here I've got more high here. But I'm also working out how this grain is working. Is it good? Is it bad? Am I going into the end grain? You see now I'm getting a stroke all the way through. I've got an edge all the way through here. So I'm going to switch planes again, go to a longer one. Little extra weight. Now I'm being resisted by the grain because I'm actually planing against the grain here. And sometimes this isn't something that's explained very well, especially when people are selling planes. The planes always work perfectly. There is some grain that you cannot plane. You will not be able to plane, or if it's been finely tuned and sharpened, it may take the first half a dozen strokes off, but it won't continue to. Here you can see, I think, how I've gone down. So I'm closer to being square now along here. There I'm very much dead square, just a slight round in there. But I'm going to turn around now and work from this end, because in here, this is how I can tell I'm planing against the grain. And sometimes people say it goes against the grain and they don't understand why. This is a bit like stroking the cat backwards. So we're stroking the grain backwards. We want to come from the opposite direction. I'll drop this in the vise here. This is very obvious here. There's lots of undulating, torn grain fibres here. Watch what happens when I come this way. Hopefully. Smooth as silk now. Much smoother. Another thing that people often miss is this little thing here. This is a 4 ounce or whatever tomato can stuffed with a rag, rolled up and then soaked in oil. This makes more difference to the plane than anything you can do to a plane. Wonderful. Now it's moving across this wood, so slick. I'm going to just check myself for square to make sure that I'm not making this more out of square. It's almost dead on, really. Remember, I only have to go down 20 inches down here. So I'm going to back my iron off a little bit, tweak it a bit too much. a little bit more resistance. This is a hardwood. It's a little bit more resistant to the plane. So the square registers against the face edge here, the face here. Then I go on here. I don't know if you can see there. We're now dead square. Got it? So I eyeball along the edge. It's good all the way along. There's a little bit of a high spot down here. So I'm going to set my plane quite fine just to take that little bit off there. And I'm going to check myself for square again here. And that's perfectly square. There should be no gaps in here. And I'm beyond my 19 inches that I actually want. So while I've got this length, I'm going to rip down this piece of wood, and I'm going to use a marking gauge to get the thickness of the piece that I want. So on the end here, this will give me an idea. Let me show you how I want to get rid of this wane here. If you go with your square from the corner into that corner over there, this point here is exactly the same distance from here as this point is from here. So that will tell me where I can register. Now, this is because I don't have a fixed size for this leg. If I had a fixed size, it would be 1.5 inches, then I would just mark 1.5 inches. I want this as large as I possibly can. I actually want 2 1/4, and I've got 2 1/8. So I'm actually going to keep this little bit of wane on that inside edge. Rather than lose the whole leg, I need a 2 1/4 inch leg. So I set this gauge now to 2 1/4 like this. And I can register the gauge to this face here and also to this face here. That gives me the exact size I want for the billet. Now I'm going to run this gauge along this face here using this reference face. One thing I didn't do is to mark that second face. I'm going to, from that where the tail of this cursive letter F goes, I'm going to make a mark like this. This is a very traditional mark. It goes back 300-400 years. This marks this face, and it shows me all the time that these two faces are my registration faces for my gauge line to follow, or my square to register again. Here I'm going to run this gauge along this edge and this face down there to there. Then I'm going to turn end for end, and again the face that I marked originally is going to be my registration face. I run down this edge too, like this. So you can see now that I'm going to be perfectly parallel, and I'm going to cut away from the line. One thing else I want to do is make sure I don't cut too much wood. I don't want this piece, it's not going to be of any value. So I'm going to mark this at 20 inches so that I know where to stop. And then after I've done that, I can cross cut here and I can cross cut here, and that will ensure I've got 2 square ends to my table leg. Okay, so we're going to rip down here now with a fairly big saw. So we're finished with planing for a minute. We're going to rip down here. I've got a saw here that's really good for this. This saw has 5.5 teeth to the inch, so it's a fairly substantial rip saw. So I start away from my line about maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And this is going to take me a while to rip down here. So just adjust your body until it's in a good ripping stance. My left leg is forward, my back leg is in the form of a T, and I keep ripping and run down this line till I get to my 20-inch mark. So I've gone down to my line. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut this to the final length, then I'm unhindered by the extra length. So I want to make sure, boy, that was an upper body workout, that was. Gets your heart pumping. So I'm going to make a knife wall here, and a knife wall here. Chisel into it just to get my saw started. Now I would use a panel saw for this, probably, which is a small hand saw, 22 inch, that sort of size, with a small tooth. The one I'm going to use is 11 points per inch. So I want to put this in the vise here, and I'm angling this up so I can get a full saw cut across here. And I probably will stay away from my line just a little bit once I've started, so I can plane this end grain perfectly square. Through to that 2 1/4 depth. This one here. So I've got my rough surface here. So I'm going to plane. Now remember, this leg is going to be shaped, so most of this is going to disappear, this wane on the edge. So I'm going to keep this. You can see I stayed away from my line here. Bit rugged from the hand sawing, but I can get this with the hand plane now. So I just plane down to this line, like this. So I'm looking at the grain to see if I'm planing in the right direction. Going for my big plane straight off. Not sure if I should. Let me think about it. Yeah. This is going to work. Quite fuzzy down there. I'm going to put a deeper set on my plane. You can hear. And I'm looking this one edge here for my reference line. Another thing too is when you're planing wood that doesn't have this wane on, you can set your gauge line to both sides, but you can't do that till after you've ripped down the length. I'm playing against the grain here, and I'm going to leave it. Sometimes that helps you to hug off a little bit more because it pulls the plane down into the wood. I'm going to check myself for square. I'm almost down to my line. I'm quite a bit out of square here, but I still have my reference line here. You can see that. Can you see there? So I still have my line. I'm right on the line there. And up here I still have my line. So I still have, I'm down to my line there. So I'm going to plane it square. I'm going to turn it round. now, because I want to take off this side, and I want to plane with the grain now, just to true up. That usually means there's a piece of fibre in there that's dogging you. Just check yourself for square, see if you're moving towards squareness here. Still more to come off. Pretty close though. So I'm not taking anything off this outside edge just yet. Check myself again, see how close. I'm moving pretty close now. Close there. A little bit more on this side. One more check. And we are dead square. Dead square this end. Still got my registration line there and there. Eyeball down the length, a little bit hollow. This bark can be a little bit rough on your plane too. Perfectly square. So on this last face now, I already marked this edge here, but I can also mark this corner here, even with the bark there, and that will tell me when to stop planing. We're pretty close to getting exactly where we need to be. Bit of a high there. That's where I split it at the end. Oh boy. Now I'm going really into some hard end grain here, and I'm reading that there was a knot here. I don't know if you can see this undulating grain here. Tells me that there was maybe a small branch or something that was coming off there. It could have been a big branch. This could be the very tail end of it inside the wood. So I'm turning around and seeing if this will benefit me to turn around. And it is. Definitely making this much easier now. Don't forget you've got this little tool here just to grease the sole of your plane, like this. Check your depth. I'm almost down. Got more to come off at this end. I'm going into end grain again down here, but generally it's planing up just fine. I can see here is my depth line is still on there. It's just almost 1/1000th of an inch really, not very much. So I'm actually close enough. So now I take a shallower setting on my plane. And this is a point where this is actually straight now, so what I might do is switch to a smoothing plane with a light setting just to smooth up the surface, which is what this plane was really designed for, until I get a nice pristine surface. And this is now ready for laying out my joinery, because I'm square this way, I'm square this way. So I've got my billet done. The only thing I have left to do is to actually cut it to length. to the exact size, the finished length. So to do that, I use the knife wall method as I did before, cut all the way through, and I've got my leg ready.